When the United States hit China with a fresh wave of tariffs, the expectation was simple. Economic pressure would force China to back down. But that's not what happened. Instead, China responded with a strategy years in the making, targeting not just American products but the very foundation of America's economic influence. They imposed tariffs on key industries, yes, but that's just the surface. Behind the scenes, China is securing critical supply chains, tightening its grip on rare resources, and cutting deals with U.S. rivals to weaken America's leverage globally. This isn't about immediate retaliation, it's about shifting the balance of power over time. Today we're breaking it all down. What's happening, why it matters, and how it's changing the world economy. February 2025, the spark. In February 2025, the U.S. set off new economic tensions by imposing tariffs on over $60 billion worth of Chinese goods. This wasn't a sudden decision, it was part of President Trump's ongoing push to bring back American manufacturing. The new tariffs hit key areas: computer parts, electric vehicle materials, and basic resources needed for modern technology. The goal was to pressure China into changing its trade practices. The reality? It sparked a response that went far beyond simple trade. While the U.S. framed it as protecting American jobs, China saw it as an attack not just on its economy, but on its global position. China's answer wasn't rushed or emotional. Within days, they announced tariffs targeting $35 billion in American goods, focusing on farming, energy, and cars. But it wasn't just about what they targeted, it was about where. China focused on industries tied to important political regions in the U.S., soybeans from the Midwest, oil from Texas. This was about creating pressure from inside the U.S., knowing these affected businesses would push back against U.S. policies. Beyond tariffs, China also made new trade deals with countries like Brazil, Russia, and even Mexico, finding new suppliers to reduce their need for American goods. While the U.S. was focused on applying pressure, China was quietly building a new, broader strategy. Rare earths, China's quiet ace. While most people focused on tariffs, China used one of its strongest economic tools: rare earth minerals. These are essential for smartphones, electric cars, and even military equipment, and China controls over 80% of the world's supply. After the new U.S. tariffs, China hinted it might limit exports of these materials to the U.S. This was no idle threat. It was a calculated move to put pressure on industries the U.S. depends on for both business and security. Imagine trying to build advanced technology without the raw materials to make it work. That's the kind of quiet but powerful pressure China is leveraging, through control of resources the world relies on. Energy and beyond. China didn't stop with farming products, it went after America's energy industry as well, adding new taxes on U.S. oil and liquefied natural gas. This matters because China has been one of the biggest buyers of American energy. The impact was immediate. U.S. energy companies lost contracts, shipments were delayed, and profits dropped. At the same time, China shifted its focus to making energy deals with Russia, countries in the Middle East, and boosting its own production to rely less on the U.S. Even if tariffs are removed in the future, these new energy deals may remain, resulting in lost income and diminished influence for the U.S. in one of the world's biggest markets. The real tech war. While products like steel and soybeans get attention, the real fight is over technology. The U.S. tried to limit China's access to advanced tech, banning the sale of important computer chips and blocking companies like Huawei from doing business with American firms. China's response was to invest heavily in its own technology, pouring money into domestic chip manufacturing, AI research, and building faster 5G networks to reduce reliance on U.S. technology. But here's the twist. Instead of slowing China down, these actions may have made it stronger. Chinese tech companies are now creating products that can compete with or even outperform their American counterparts. This isn't just a trade fight anymore, it's a race to see who will lead the future of global technology. China is quickly closing the gap. U.S. debt, A subtle pressure point. China holds over $800 billion in U.S. government debt. Selling all of it at once would hurt China as well, but even small changes in how much debt they buy can shake up the global economy. After the new tariffs, China quietly started buying less U.S. debt, causing ripple effects. It became more expensive for the U.S. government to borrow money, which in turn can drive up interest rates for home loans, car loans, and credit cards. This is a quiet yet effective form of economic pressure. The U.S. relies on countries like China to help finance its debt. If China pulls back even slightly, it creates money problems that can't be solved with tariffs. Building a global network. One of China's smartest moves has been to build stronger relationships with other countries. While the U.S. was adding tariffs, China was signing new trade deals with the European Union, Southeast Asian nations, and forming closer partnerships with Russia and Latin America. The goal is simple: reduce dependence on the U.S. while expanding China's influence in other markets. This approach doesn't just help China avoid tariffs, it creates a global network where the U.S. has less control. For American businesses, losing Chinese customers is painful enough, but facing new competition in foreign markets can be even more damaging. Shifts in North America. While the U.S. and China grabbed the headlines, Canada and Mexico dealt with their own issues, both being hit with U.S. tariffs. They responded with tariffs of their own. Canada targeted American farm products, while Mexico added taxes on steel, pork, and whiskey. As tensions grew, both Canada and Mexico started building stronger trade ties with China. This shift could weaken America's influence in its own neighborhood, turning former close partners into countries that rely more on China. Reshaping global supply chains. One of the biggest impacts of this trade war is the reshaping of global supply chains. For years, the U.S. and other countries relied heavily on China for manufacturing. With rising tariffs and tensions, companies are rethinking that strategy. China anticipated this and has been investing in places like Vietnam, Indonesia, and even parts of Africa to create new supply routes that bypass U.S. partnerships. This helps China avoid future tariff risks and build stronger ties with developing economies. For American companies, shifting production elsewhere means higher costs and longer timelines. It's not just a short-term disruption, it's a permanent change in how goods are made and moved around the globe. The impact on American farmers. American farmers are some of the hardest hit in this trade war. China was one of the largest buyers of U.S. agricultural products: soybeans, corn, and pork. After the tariffs, China slashed its purchases, turning to Brazil and Argentina instead. For U.S. farmers, this meant crops with nowhere to go, falling prices and rising debts. Some received government bailouts, but that's only a temporary fix. The real issue is long-term. Once China finds new suppliers, they may not return to American farms, even if tariffs are lifted later. This is not just economic, it's political. Farming communities are key voters, and their frustration puts more pressure on U.S. leaders. Higher prices at home. When countries impose tariffs on each other, it's not just businesses that suffer. Everyday people do too, through higher prices on goods from electronics to clothing, food, and household items. Businesses facing higher import costs often pass those costs on to consumers. For example, smartphones that rely on Chinese-made parts are now more expensive. Groceries that used to come from international suppliers cost more because of tariffs on agricultural products. It acts like a hidden tax, one that shows up at the checkout line without most people realizing it's connected to global trade tensions. Market volatility. Global markets hate uncertainty, and the U.S.-China trade war has created plenty of it. Every time new tariffs are announced or trade talks break down, stock markets react, sometimes with massive drops. Investors don't just worry about the direct costs of tariffs, they worry about what they mean for economic growth, corporate profits, and the stability of global supply chains. Big companies that rely on international trade, tech giants, car manufacturers, often see their stock prices swing wildly based on the latest trade news. This volatility doesn't just affect Wall Street, it impacts retirement accounts, pensions, and everyday investments, leading to more risk and less financial security for millions. While the United States and China are at the center of this trade war, the effects are global. Countries that trade heavily with both nations are caught in the middle. Southeast Asian economies face supply chain disruptions, European companies deal with higher costs, and developing countries that supply raw materials to China are affected when Chinese demand drops. This ripple effect means the trade war isn't just a problem for two countries, it's slowing down global economic growth, driving up costs worldwide and creating uncertainty for businesses and governments everywhere. When two of the world's largest economies clash, the shockwaves reach every corner of the globe. Where does this all lead? The truth is, no one knows for sure. Trade wars are easy to start but hard to end. Even if the United States and China reach a new agreement, the damage to business relationships, supply chains, and political trust is already done. China is clearly focused on becoming less dependent on the United States by investing in its own industries, building new alliances, and aiming for global leadership in technology and finance. For the United States, the challenge is maintaining economic influence amid stronger competition, not just from China, but from the new networks China is building. The big question isn't just about tariffs, it's about what the next phase of US-China relations will look like in a rapidly changing world. The US-China trade war goes beyond tariffs, it's shaping the future of the global economy. China isn't reacting randomly, every move is part of a larger strategy to shift economic power. Recent analyses by global economic institutions provide deeper insight into how trade disputes between the United States and China can reshape worldwide trade patterns. 1. Impact on global GDP. According to a 2024 International Monetary Fund working paper, sustained tariff escalations between the United States and China could reduce global GDP by up to 0.8% over the next 3 years if both countries continue retaliatory measures. The paper notes that while the direct effect of tariffs is significant, the indirect effect, eroding business confidence and discouraging long-term investments, can be even more damaging. 2. Supply chain diversification. A joint study by the World Trade Organization and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development found a marked increase in investment flows to Southeast Asia, particularly Vietnam and Malaysia, as multinational corporations seek alternative manufacturing hubs to circumvent US-China tariffs. This trend has been termed China Plus One, reflecting the strategy of keeping a base in China while diversifying production to neighboring countries. 3. Technological decoupling research conducted by the Brookings Institution highlights the accelerated pace of what analysts call technological decoupling, wherein countries build parallel tech ecosystems. China's ramped-up R&D spending and focus on self-reliance in advanced semiconductors mirror the United States' efforts to prevent technology transfers in critical areas. This decoupling could lead to fragmented global tech standards and potentially higher costs for consumers and businesses in both markets. 4. Rare earth market shifts. Studies from the United States Geological Survey indicate that while China retains a dominant position in rare earths, countries like Australia, the United States, and Canada have begun expanding their own exploration and mining efforts. Government incentives in these countries aim to establish alternative supply chains, though analysts agree it will take years to challenge China's near monopoly effectively. 5. Long-term agricultural adjustments. Data from the United Nations Comtrade database shows that Brazil's share of global soybean exports has grown by nearly 10% since 2022, correlating with China's reduced imports from the United States. Experts at the Center for Global Development believe this shift in China's sourcing patterns could become entrenched, as Brazilian suppliers invest in greater production capacity to meet permanent demand. 6. Domestic political ramifications. Political economists from Harvard Kennedy School argue that prolonged agricultural losses in the American Midwest could tilt future elections, as rural communities bear the brunt of lost exports. They point out that federal bailout programs have mitigated some short-term harm but do not address the deeper issue of permanently losing a major buyer like China. 7. Multilateral trade frameworks. Scholars at the Peterson Institute for International Economics note that both the United States and China have signaled a willingness to renegotiate certain tariff lines under more modern free trade frameworks. However, ongoing geopolitical tensions, particularly regarding intellectual property, national security and technology transfer, make comprehensive agreements unlikely in the near term. 8. Macroeconomic outlook. A consensus from several major banks, including Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, forecasts continued volatility in global markets. While they do not predict a full-scale recession solely from tariffs, they caution that consumer spending and corporate earnings could slow if higher costs persist and supply chains remain in flux. In summary, credible research points to a multipolar shift in global trade relationships spurred by the US-China trade conflict. While short-term tariff impacts are significant, the lasting changes, such as supply chain realignments, technological decoupling, and agricultural trade redirection, are likely to define the next decade of economic competition and cooperation. As both nations continue to vie for strategic advantage, the broader global community faces rising uncertainty. It remains to be seen whether new trade pacts, domestic policy shifts, or innovative technologies can mitigate these pressures and foster a more stable economic landscape. These insights underscore how the trade war is about far more than immediate retaliatory duties. It's an ongoing recalibration of global power dynamics that affects nearly every sector, from energy and technology to agriculture and finance. Understanding the underlying data and the strategic moves being made on both sides is critical for policymakers, businesses, and ordinary citizens aiming to navigate a rapidly evolving global economy. Who's setting themselves up to lead in the years ahead? Is the United States strategy holding strong, or is China quietly gaining ground? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this breakdown valuable, consider subscribing for more insights on global events that impact us all. Thank you for reading, and I'll catch you in the next one.